I guess the ideal thing would be to start at the beginning of the family and to talk a little bit about how the Sparre family originated and where we originated and just basically the beginning, if as much as you know about that.
So I start now? Or?
Yeah.
Well, the Sparre family is one of the 4 oldest families in Sweden, and that still can keep the pedigree all the way down, and we can follow the line down to around 1375 or something like that. There were members or families with the same crest, with the same name before, but we do not descend directly from them on the male line. So we say we are from end of 14th century and from Västergötland. Västergötland is the western part of Sweden, and that was the border between Sweden and Denmark at the time, and it's known in all countries that those who are close to the border of the enemy, that the development in many ways is faster, and as to armament, as to fortifications and so forth. So it all started there.
And then what happened?
And then what happened? Yes, well, when the power came over to Sigtuna, and Stockholm later became capital of Sweden, of course the Sparres always wanted to be where the power was, so they were but the first really well-known Sparre was Lars Siggesson, and he was together with the King Gustav Vasa captured by the Danes and brought to prison in Denmark, and he fled together with Gustav Vasa, and when Gustav Vasa became king of Sweden, Lars Sigurdsson Sparre was in a way his right hand, and because there were parts of Sweden who didn't accept him as king, for example in Småland, the southern part, where there was insurrection with Nils Dacke, and then Lars Sparre was what we say in Swedish riksmarsk, so he was the head of the army, and he could beat all the enemies of the king.
And what year was that?
Well, this the Gustav Vasa became head of state in Sweden in 1521, but he was made king in 1523. So that's when shall I say, the more glorious times of the family start. And Lars Sigurdsson, he was also, but I can't tell you right now, I have to look into my papers, pretty close relative to the Vasas. And even more his son Erik, the big Erik, called the first, not the first lawyer, but the first big lawman in Sweden, who wrote this thesis, De lege, rege et grege, for law, king, and people, which was something exceptional at that time, because he wanted the law first and the king afterwards. The king should abide to the law. So this was in opposite to Machiavelli, who before said that the prince should have all the power. And of course, this was not a very popular idea, because the Vasas, they wanted all the power. And Erik Sparre's theses were never really accepted in Sweden, but still, and that I think is very interesting, where he married Ebba Brahe, and the father of Ebba Brahe was a cousin to Gustav Vasa, so it's the same. A few families that governed Sweden at the time. And Erik, who was then beheaded in the year 1600, what we call the bloodbath of Linköping, together with some of his closest friends, Bjelke and Baner. However, if his ideas how the country should be reigned were rejected in Sweden, they were studied on other parts in Europe. In Germany, there were several. Germany consisted of a lot of, what shall I say, dukedoms or the princes who had
Duchies.
Yes, and they studied this and made their institutions according to ideas of Erik Sparre, and later on Axel Oxenstierna, who was the most powerful man, and he almost, you can say, he reigned Sweden as the Queen Christina was very young when she came to power, when her father died in 1632 in Lützen in Germany. So then Axel Oxenstierna, he liked the ideas of Erik Sparre. And as you know, Axel Oxenstierna helped Cromwell to write the constitution in England. So the ideas of Sparre, Erik Sparre, they have been spread in big parts of Europe, and recently there have been both in Poland and in Germany, in the universities, professors who have written theses over his work. So it's interesting that even today, 500 years later, his ideas are valuable.
Oh, that's very interesting. What year did he die around?
1600.
1600.
20th of March, and that was, what you say in English, the Friday in the Easter week,
Good Friday.
Good Friday, yes, it was on the Good Friday, but we had another calendar at that time. I think we have now the Gregorian, and before it was the Justinianus calendar or something like that. So it was very cold, and it was a very early Easter. Nowadays the Easter comes later. So it was a cold day when they had this bloodbath in Linköping, and where the sons, several of the children of Erik were present in Linköping when their father lost his head. And some of them, he had, with Ebba Brahe, 13 children. I think one, Povel, died rather young, but most of them did very well. And Johan Sparre was the first Land Marshal of Sweden when in the new House of Nobility, and he was succeeded a couple of years later by next son Lars. Lars, he has been in recent days, they've written a lot about Lars because the King Gustav Adolf II, he was in love with an Ebba Brahe the Younger, and wanted to marry. He was very much in love with her, but he was not allowed to. They wanted a princess for him. But anyhow, it was this Lars Sparre who went with all the letters and correspondence between Ebba Brahe and Prince Gustav Adolf. Later on, Gustav Adolf.
What period of time did the Sparres arrive to France, and how did the Sparres wind up in France? What is the story with?
Yes. Maybe before that I should say some words about Erik Sparre. He also became a Scottish baron in 1583 by the Scottish King James VI, son of Maria Stuart. At that time, James VI was very young. His mother, who spent over 20 years in the Tower as prisoner of Elizabeth I of England, she sat there and waited for her son to come and rescue her, but he didn't. He liked very much to be a king in Scotland. But he became friend of Erik Sparre. Erik were over in Scotland, and there was one of the most powerful men in Scotland, Andreas Keith, a very close friend to the king and to Erik Sparre. And apparently Erik Sparre did some good services to the King James, because he was made a baron. And that is something extremely rare in the history of Scotland. They have never before or later made a foreigner a Scottish baron. And he came back and with a Scottish dog called Morton. But you mentioned the French branch, and then it was a great son to Erik, Per, who was, he was a Swedish riksråd, let's say, minister, and he was down for a peace treaty and negotiated a peace between the big countries on the continent, and right now I don't, it was not the Spanish succession war, it was later. Anyhow, this was in 1675, and he did this so well that the French king, Louis XIV, made him a French count for him and all his descendants. And I have a copy of the original letter signed by Louis XIV. And what's interesting when you read this is that 3 times he emphasizes the importance of the women of the Sparre family, and that all the women in the Sparre family will be countesses, whoever they marry. And this is something rather unusual, and I have shown this to French historians, and they say they haven't seen anything similar. Nobody thought that Louis XIV was a feminist, but still it's rather interesting. And then from this Per Sparre, who is buried in the Riddarholmskyrkan in Stockholm, all the design, he went back to Sweden, and but his children went to France, and they are the heads of the French line, so to say. And they did very well in France, the Sparres, and still do. There are 14 of them alive today. So
there are only 14 in all of France?
yes.
14 people or 14
14 person born Sparre, yes.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
But I know them very well, all of them. And there are 2 branches, and they didn't communicate until I brought them together 15 years ago. Now there is a good communication.
You see, you're bringing the world together there. Oh, wow. So where are the 2 branches in France? Are they spread out everywhere? Are they regional?
Well, yes. The head of the family down there, Eric, and his wife Pascal, they have triplets, 3 girls who are now 21, 22 years old, and young Stanislas, who is 16 or 17. But they live mainly in Paris, but they have an old castle, but they call it castle, an old house in the neighbor of Villefranche-sur-Saône in the Beaujolais district. They have 2 good French wines, Domaine de la Tour de Bief et Domaine de la Rochelle. But then they used to have a manor in close to Bordeaux, but they sold that 2 years ago.
Interesting. And then, so where does the Sparre regiment come into this, and the flag and the
Yes, the Sparre. It was the son of a brother to this pair who was made French count. So Eric was his name, and the mother of Eric was Stenbock, and yes, and she had a good. The Stenbocks, they were very rich in Sweden. So the money comes from Stenbock mainly. And he bought a regiment in France in 1694, 20th of October. And it was set up, well, from the beginning they said there should be only Swedish officers and noble. You couldn't be officer at that time if you were not noble. But a lot of Swedes who came down there, they were not noble. But they put in France, you just put the in front of the name, and then it was accepted in France. But this regiment took part in all French wars, and they had a very good reputation. They were often used both for attack and to safeguard the retreat. For that you need very disciplined soldiers. And the discipline was high, and they had all in the regiment, I suppose all regiment at the time they had a hangman who was part of the regiment, so you shouldn't be tempted to go over to the enemy. And I don't think many of them did.
And they used the flag that we saw today that you had given.
Yes, yes, they did. This is how they look. And of course you think Swedish yellow and blue, but I have seen French regiments at that time as well who had yellow and blue uniforms. But and this regiment, it was like an accordion, when it was war, they could be up to 5,000-6,000 men, and when it was peace, they were only 400 or 500, and they sent home the soldiers and paid the officers only half salary. So everybody wanted, of course, a good war, so they could sort of be upgraded in rank and get better paid, and show how brave they were.
So 5,000 or 6,000 men at the largest.
Mm.
Wow, that's a lot of people back then. I mean, that's amazing.
And then at that time, the regiment moved quite a lot, because they lived on what the farmers could give them. Where they stayed, and they couldn't stay too long at the same place. So that's one reason by them. And also, they didn't want them to stay too long at one place, because then the officers started to be in love with the beautiful girls in the region, you see, and that could also create difficulties.
Yeah, that doesn't change much with time.
No.
And so what? Just to get me back oriented, that around what decade would that have been, or what century, what years?
Well, you see, this regiment was mainly, with two short exceptions, it was owned by the family Sparre. They were, as they say in France, colonel commandant and colonel propriétaire. So you could have one colonel who was the owner of the regiment and one colonel who was the head in fight or in war. But the Sparres were mainly both. And but then we had the regiment, which in 1742 got the right to be called Royal Svedwa, and this was due to extreme bravery, so it was a special honor to be called Royal Svedwa. And the Royal Svedwa lived up till 1792, and this was 3 years after the French Revolution, and the King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, when they were killed. I mean, you couldn't have a royal regiment in France. So they were included or in the 89th Regiment of Infantry.
They were like absorbed.
Now, Benjamin Franklin, he was in France, you know, and he wanted to recruit people to come over to fight in the American War of Freedom, I think you call
The
it.
American Revolution.
Yes, together with Lafayette, and they wanted to bring the Royal Suédois over to America. But then both the French and the Swedish kings said out of question. Of course, England was the big enemy, and they wanted to fight England, but a royal regiment could not support Republicans in America. Look at this flag. How could we bring this one over to America and fight the royalists in America?
How did Sparre wind up on the Arc de Triomphe?
That is well, the Sparres, they were officers and they were generals, several of them, and when that was the job they could do, and they joined the French army. No Sparre was beheaded during the revolution, and after they joined the army, several of them, and one, Louis Ernest, called Louis Sparre, he made a brilliant career, and he was one of Napoleon's generals, and fought with him a bit all over the world. And Louis Sparre, he died in 1844, same year as his very good friend Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, who became a king of Sweden later. They fought together, and the Sparre, Louis Sparre, he came to Sweden with his two sons and had thought of coming back with the family to Sweden again. But he didn't. He went back to France, and I'm not sure, but probably it was his wife who didn't like the Swedish weather. As the wife of Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, Désirée Clary, didn't like the weather in Sweden, so they stayed in France. And but he made later a nice career. He was made Pair de France, and he was, although he was Scottish Baron, French Count, but they took away all the titles as a revolution, and he was made Baron de l'Empire. So during Napoleon he was made Baron again, but then he was Marshal de France. Which well, it's difficult to say what it was. Of course, a very high rank, but it depends on different times in France. It was higher than other. Sometimes they were more, and if there are only two, of course, it's better than if you are 10. But he got the highest distinction you can get in France, Grand Croix de la Légion d'honneur, in April 1844. And in the beginning of June, he was receiving a German prince at the Champ de Mars and he had his troop. He was on his horse with all his decoration and his new Grand Croix de la Légion d'honneur, and he gets what in the French call apoplexy, some brain stroke, I think, and fell from the horse and died in front of the prince and all the soldiers, right on the spot where now we have La Tour Eiffel. So he had a brilliant death too. I think that's the way to pass away.
And what was his name again?
Louis.
Ah, woo.
Yeah.
I hope I don't. Well, a little theatrical, but. So what year was that around?
Well, he died in 1844. But if you look at Arc de Triomphe, where his name that was made earlier, and there you find the names of the generals under the battles where they fought. And so you can see his name is very close to Bernadotte, so they fought together at that particular battle. And if you look very close at Arc de Triomphe, you see that some names has a line below the name, and that means that they were killed in that particular fight.
I didn't know that. And so what now? We keep talking about France. What was happening in Sweden with the Sparres in the 1700s and 1800s?
Well, a really big time it was in the 17th century. In the end of 17th century, the king, Charles XI, he took back a lot of land and castles that his predecessors had given away to the oldest families in Sweden. So there we lost a lot of castles and a big fortune. But they were still doing pretty well even in the 18th century, and had a lot of posts in important places. And you are from the branch of the counts. They were mainly officers, and most of the counts were in the Navy. They were naval officers and admirals. So well, you know your branch better than I do, maybe.
No, I don't. No, I doubt it. I don't.
But all the way down to, I mean, we have Gustav Sparre, who got the Order of the Seraphim, the highest recognition a Swede can get. In 1905, he was Speaker for the Parliament. He was asked twice to become Prime Minister, but he said no, thank you. I still got his linen here, his serviettes and tablecloth, but they start to be a bit old.
And then I'm trying to think. In the 19th century, who was Per Ambjorn's father?
Per Ambjorn's father, his name was Per Sparre. He lived in Karlskrona at the time. He was a colonel, and but he created something in between, like this Royal Swedish Marine, something, not the Navy and not the army, but they were in the coast and cooperated with, Sweden has
like a coast guard.
A lot of coast, some sort of a coast guard which he created. But he was an artist. He wrote books, poems. His wife, Carolina Pilgård, was also a very good artist. and made beautiful gouaches and oil, watercolor, and then he wrote books. Per Georg. He wrote books, and he was what they called Sweden's. I said it yesterday. Anyhow, his books were extremely appreciated in Sweden. Historic stories and about the war with the Danes and another.
Was it the Sir Walter Scott?
Exactly, yes, the Sir Walter Scott of Sweden, and so everybody knew his. And I have upstairs his books, and some given out in 1860 and others in 1925, 6th edition and things. So I mean, it was really appreciated.
Wow.
And he was then the father of Per Ambjörn, who married Teresita de Barbavera, who died after only a few years of marriage. You know, the wagon turned over, and
how old was she? Do you know when she was?
well, she was not very old, and I think they were not married for many years. I can't tell you right away, but I can look it up. But
Yeah,
she was young, and I think they were only married 3 years or something like that.
And then, could you just talk a little bit about what Per Ambjörn did with the stamp and?
Well, Per Ambjörn, he was a technical genius, but not a financial genius. He is he invented a tremendous lot of things. We talked about the stamps, the machines making stamps. He could also make banknotes. He went up to Bank of England and said, I can make notes for you that can't be... Or he told you, your notes are so easy to falsify, so I can do that easily. I can do much better for you. And they locked him in a room, and he made, you say notes?
Yeah.
Notes, yes. That they couldn't see if they were real or true. And these, we have them here in Stockholm in a bank museum. This money he made. And his son Louis Sparre has said that he has seen his father cut a note in two with a sharp knife. So he I don't know, but that was what he said. And
but why cut it in two?
No, split it. No, not cut it, but split it this way.
Oh wait, the thin.
Yeah,
like this.
Yeah, exactly. So he could with a knife, you know, split it that way. But that was Louis told that. But then he invented together with another Swede who was in England, they were making submarines, airplanes, lot of machines for industry. He made a bicycle, fabricated bicycles in Karlskrona. All brilliant projects, but he never managed to make an economic success of it. And during the war, 70-71, between France and Germany, and when the Germans they were even shooting at Paris with Big Bertha, which, by the way, it was another Sparre, one of the French Sparre, Magnus, who was professor in ballistic, and he managed to calculate from where Big Bertha was shooting. So, after that, he's called Le Grand Magnus, the Big Magnus. He's all the French are very proud of this Big Magnus. But at the same time, we had Per Ambjörn, and he was in Lille during the war and set up a factory for making guns and especially ammunition. And until then, you needed ammunition with metal, but the metal was scarce, and he managed to make bullets with gunpowder and with hard paper around, I think, which could shoot even so well. And he was very much appreciated in Lille, and the Germans never took Lille, and Sparre was called the savior of Lille. But very close after that, he was attacked for high treason, and I think this was something they had just found out, because he had an enormous debt on the French government, which they didn't want to pay. But he finally got freed in the court, but at one moment he had been sentenced, and it could have ended very well if not Gambetta, who was that head of state in France, had sent a telegram and saved him, and he even got the French honorary Legion, la Légion d'honneur, as well. So, but after that, he tried to invent almost everything, but never cars. In the end of 19th century, the car. But Per Ambjörn said, "Oh no, the cars have no future. I mean, anybody, you have just to look at the roads with big holes and stones and whatever. I mean, so he never was never interested in cars, and amazingly, his life was ended when he was hit by a car in Paris at Rue de Rivoli. And he didn't die immediately, but short after, and he was 93 years old. His son Louis died 101-year-old. Per Ambjörn, anyhow, but I think and then when he was 90, he was still inventing a machine for not for cutting wood, but for taking away what do you say, bark? No, on the trees,
Bark, yeah.
Yeah, he was inventing that at 93 years of age, and he is buried on cemetery right south of Paris, and I've been there because family Sparre with our organization, we have restored his grave, which was in pretty bad shape. And then I was down there and put flowers on his grave a year ago when we celebrated 150 years of the first Swedish stamp.
Which was his most famous
Yes.
contribution.
Yeah, right now it's that. And a couple of years ago they were going to celebrate, that was in 2002 I think, Per Ambian, he was the first Swede ever in a balloon. But at that time it was an Italian who traveled around. His name was Tardini. And he came with his balloon to Stockholm. He had been to Leningrad before, and he had gas in his balloon. Not Montgolfier had warm air, I think, but Tardini had gas in the balloon. Now,
could you talk a little bit about the stamp and just the machine that he had built, and the most valuable, the yellow stamp?
Yeah. Well, he both invented the machine, and he also draw the stamps. I mean, he could do everything, but to do a lot of exactly equal stamps and with the little holes, between, and that was one of his big inventions. And he was, although he was rather young at the time, head of this manufacture of stamps in Sweden. And but then at one, the most expensive stamp now in the world probably is a 3-shilling Banco yellow, who right now is in Switzerland, and nobody knows exactly what it was, but a lot of million, or if we're talking dollars, I should say it's $4,000 maybe.
4,000.
Yeah, I think the last time we saw someone pay for it, it was around 20 million Swedish crowns.
So $4 million.
Yeah, sorry, exactly.
Wow.
But as this Björn, what's his name now? We met at the museum today. He says that it was probably not Per who made that stamp, which was colored yellow by mistake. It was because he was out that day, and it was another one who was going to help him who made the mistake. Sparre never made any mistakes.
Wow.